Thank you, Ricky. Good morning, everyone. Y'all are in for a treat this morning. I've been chatting a little bit with our next panelists, and it's just been a really fun discussion. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Sheri Higgins from SEPA. She's their president and CEO. Natasha Contreras from SDG&E, and Drew Higgins from CPS Energy. All right. So we're going to be talking about transportation electrification, some of the challenges that utilities are facing and ways that they're approaching those challenges. And it seems like, over probably the past even 3 or so years, the number of EVs that you see on the road has just really exploded. So my first question is for Drew and Natasha from the utility perspective. And Drew, I'll start with you all the way down at the end there. But what are some of the biggest impacts to utilities from this widespread adoption of electric vehicles?
Yeah, so I'll start back 4 years ago. I came to the utility industry from General Motors, automotive manufacturing, because it was clear to me that there was an opportunity. And I will tell you, 4 years ago, learning about the utility, the number one thing you saw was that utilities did a couple of very important things. They forecasted load, right? They looked at the weather and they said, if it's gonna be hot, then we expect ACs to run, so there's gonna be more load. And then they dispatched generation. They fired up gas or coal-fired plants or nuclear plants, and they delivered electrons. 4 years later, we are now basically forecasting generation, right? We're looking at the weather and seeing whether or not windmills will spin or solar panels will collect sunlight. And we're dispatching load, right? And that means we're letting batteries discharge, or we're turning off thermostats. And a very important part of that dispatching of load is EVs, right? There's a schedulable load. And so as EVs grow from a utility perspective, it's not only additional revenue in terms of like more people using this amazing product, the electron, but it gives us a certain amount of flexibility in terms of managing the grid by having this very schedulable load that we can incentivize customers to charge off-peak. And so it's in just 4 years, we're seeing the potential for a transformed grid just because of electric vehicles, which is pretty amazing.
And Natasha, what are you seeing at SDG&E?
Yeah, so SDG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric. I will just start off by saying I did go to SDSU. I'm a proud alum, and it's a bit of a rough morning this morning after last night's game, but that being set aside, I joined our clean transportation team about 5 years ago, and the evolution over the years has been extraordinary to watch. The momentum, I think, especially in California, we are light years ahead. But I think for the utility, we have been trying to figure out, with feedback from our customers over the last 5 years, what our role is in this space. What we did know is that we had to get ahead of it. For our own benefit, right? For planning purposes, to make sure that we maintain our role as cleanest, safest, most reliable, which is key. We can't have blackouts that are caused by EVs, which is, I think, a real fear that some customers have. Is the grid going to be ready? How can we manage this? But I think what we've seen is that this progression, in order to keep up with it, we've had to keep customer first, right? We have to engage with them. We had to keep them as part of our planning process. And so I think what we've seen over the past few years is just this slow and steady progression, and we're getting ready to hit the tip of the bell curve when we're transitioning to mass majority. In California, in our region specifically, in San Diego, South Orange County, we have 80,000 EVs on the roads already today, and we've been able to keep up with it, which is pretty exciting. But I think our role has evolved, transitioning from just mass awareness and just education of what this new technology is, what is the utility's role in this technology. I think it's beyond just putting pipes and wires and infrastructure into the ground in order to support it. I think, innovative rate structures in order to incentivize our customers to charge during certain times has been really really crucial. So there's still a lot to learn, but I think, we have already have the benefits of a lot of best practices and lessons learned.
And Natasha mentioned technologies. So as the EV industry kind of evolves, there's new technologies that are coming. Sheri, what are you seeing in terms of new technologies and how utilities are approaching implementing new technologies?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Thank you, Z Prime, for inviting me to Austin, Texas today. I could not be happier to be in my home state. You saw me probably in 2019 on the main stage of ACL, and I was telling Drew earlier, I saw B.B. King there about 5 months before I actually spoke on that main stage, so it was really incredible. So it's great to be back in Austin today. For those that are unfamiliar with SEPA, the Smart Electric Power Alliance, we're actually an organization, a 501c3 nonprofit, really focused on education, facilitation, and advisory services. We have over 1,100 members, 700 utilities, and it's all the utilities. It's the investor-owned utilities, the municipal utilities, and the cooperatives. And we have about 300 corporate members and all of the utility commissions. So by way of background, I've worked in the regulatory sphere for the Public Utility Commission of Texas. I've been the utility consumer advocate here in Texas. And most recently, I worked for an investor-owned utility, and I just took the helm of SEPA about 5 months ago. So why did I work for SEPA now? Because they're doing such incredible things on behalf of their members. They're really looking at the full landscape of what's happening on the technology and the R&D side. So for example, vehicle to grid, vehicle to X. We've done a lot of work in this space, working with our members, really trying to understand what's the art of the possible. Yes, it's in a pilot program phase right now, but it will be commercially available. And when we started doing the studies and the work with our members last fall, we discovered a lot of key takeaways and findings when it comes to vehicle to grid. It's really thinking about what are going to be those end uses for that, and that's resiliency, demand response programs. But to get what we need out of it, we're going to have customer compensation, awareness and education. And Natasha, I think you brought up regulatory objectives and making sure that we have the right regulations in place. On the prior panel, I heard a gentleman talk about how utilities are a little slow to adopt and slow to act. Some of that involves regulatory lag, which is important when you're a consumer advocate, important when you're a commission, but when you're a utility really trying to get to that clean energy transition and move that forward, it really takes some time to figure out what's the best process. So we're going to have to be innovative when it comes to regulatory innovation. Really customer education and awareness, making sure customers understand the different technologies that are out there and meeting them where they are. That's key for us to actually make the clean energy transition to transportation electrification. And really just ensuring that, we involve all stakeholders in that outreach and education. It's going to be the utilities, it's going to be the OEMs, it's going to be government, it's going to be nonprofit organizations and other entities that really help customers and the greater community understand the importance of this transition that we have to make.
Thank you. And for Drew and Natasha, do you have new technologies that y'all are focusing on at your utilities, like vehicle to grid or virtual power plant, some of these things that Sheri mentioned? Drew, you want to start?
Yes. So, look, the utility industry is in a state of change, and it's a very positive thing, right? And so, first of all, I will say that I am a believer in my product. The Electron is an amazing product, right? You can send it over thousands of miles on a thin little copper wire. You can transition it from sound to light to motion to heat more efficiently than any other type of energy. And one of the things that we're looking at is how do we best offer this Electron to the consumer, and how do we package it, right? And so we have things like managed charging programs where we compensate our customers for basically working with the utility to charge when and where we want them to. And then on top of that, we have different types of rebates based, once again, upon that scheduling. Additionally, other things we're looking at, virtual power plants, probably everyone's heard of that. But there's a huge pilot in Texas right now. I'm fortunate enough to be on the PUC's task force for this virtual pilot program, and we're looking at aggregating these distributed energy resources, which electric vehicles have the potential of being a huge one, and bringing that to market over the next few years as well. So when you look at kind of, in sum total, everything we're basically, we're beating the barn here. We want to get every single ounce of value out for both our customers as well as, the utility at large. And so what we're going to be seeing is there's something out there. Yes, we're doing it, and yes, we're looking for it. And fortunately, we're here at ETS. We've seen a lot of cool stuff just from even yesterday, and so we know there's a lot coming down the pipe.
Great. And Natasha?
Yes. Similar to Drew, I mean, we're trying to get our hands into all of it. I mean, the way that our organization is structured at SDG&E is I'm part of the Technology Innovation Department, which is just exciting to be a part of. Last summer, we unveiled our first V2G pilot, where we are testing that technology with a local school district where we retrofitted 8 school buses, and we're able to actually test it out last summer when we had one of our major heat waves towards the end of summer, which has been really exciting. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? School buses, I think, are a natural use case scenario for testing out V2G, and so now we want to take it further. I think a lot of the technology is going to come out of collaboration with other stakeholders in the space. The utility does have its limitations with the regulations and some of the red tape, so it's going to take partnerships. We recently announced a partnership with GM to test out some of the V2G technology and other types of use cases. We're looking at all of it: wireless technology, aviation electrification, maritime electrification. I mean, I think there's not enough time in the day to get through all of it, but we're definitely excited, and we're constantly looking for opportunities to collaborate with new stakeholders in the space.
That just made me really excited to hear all those things like aviation and maritime. And I always like hearing about the school bus example, because it's like, what better use case is there than helping kids and helping the grid. So, Sheri, you touched on how SEPA, one of the main things you guys do is working on customer engagement. So what are some ways that utilities can better engage their customers and get out there and educate them?
Yeah, I think Natasha hit the nail on the head. It's all about partnerships. Utilities realize they cannot do it alone. It really is going to take some innovation and working together with some groups and organizations that we utilities haven't typically worked with. So it's going to be working with the utility commissions, with the non-governmental organizations, with the OEMs and the electric vehicle charging infrastructure manufacturers, really thinking through how are we going to put our finger on the pulse of what customers want and what they expect. I can take a lot of lessons learned. When I was the consumer advocate for the state of Texas, it was literally getting in my truck and driving across the great state of Texas, listening to people and understanding their local needs. And utilities are going to find themselves in that position. Some of the work that we've done most recently with our utility transformation profile and our benchmarking, transportation, electrification, and equity, which I'll get into when we kind of start talking about equity, it's really about going to those local communities and listening to what their specific needs are. And then addressing those needs in a way that's unique to them, really trying to show them that, electric vehicles might be perceived as a luxury item right now, but in the future, that's going to be the pathway forward. And addressing it from the standpoint of it could lower their cost in the long run. It could address some of their health and environmental needs in their specific community. It could address some of the resiliency needs. I mean, we did talk about the storm from a couple of years ago. I wasn't going to mention that. But there are ways that EVs are going to really change the landscape of how utilities work and operate within their communities. And for them, the utilities to be able to do that, they're going to have customers as part of the process. Customer centricity, it has to be part of the thinking of planning and putting out the infrastructure, whether that's in environmental justice communities or within neighborhoods or within workforce places. We're going to have to think about it as an industry going forward. How do we get to customers? And again, the utilities cannot do it alone.
I've heard several times from people that they, were not interested in an electric vehicle until they had a friend who drove one, or until they talked to someone else, or got to test drive one themselves. And I know Drew and Natasha, your utilities both have events and things that you guys are doing to get EVs more into the face of the public. So could you talk about that a little bit? Drew, you want to start?
Absolutely. So there's, I'm going to give you guys some bullet points, right? It's one thing for us to just spew information at you, but I want to make sure you can take away something, right? So as a dealer, and this is widely tested by Tesla, they've done this for years, but there's 4 things you need to know when you buy an EV, and that's as a customer from the dealer. You need to know who your electric provider is. You need to know where you're going to charge. You need to know how long it's going to take your vehicle to charge, and you're going to need to know how far you can get on a charge. If your dealer can answer those 4 questions, that's a huge barrier that you have basically gotten over in terms of getting another body into an electric vehicle, right? And so a lot of the focus that we do is on dealer education, right? And we work with the San Antonio Auto Dealers Association as well as the National Association of Dealers, and it's a tough haul, but we're working that. And then on the customer side, there's a ratio, and take this to the bank, right? 3.5 test drives is what it takes to get a person to purchase an electric vehicle, period. So if you get the right person in the right vehicle 3.5 times, they will purchase an EV. Use that as your ROI in whatever organization you're in to essentially validate going and doing ride and drives or sponsoring events. That ROI is consistent and it's backed up with data. And so use that 3.5 test drives equals 1 electric vehicle, and then 1 electric vehicle depending upon where you are. In San Antonio, it's equal to about $450 of revenue per year. In California, it's probably about $800 of revenue per year. It's just electricity costs more. But across the nation, you're going to be averaging right about 510 to 520 every year from the electric vehicle into perpetuity. And so you can build your ROI on those two things. And that's kind of this structure, if you will, based upon these few bullet points will allow you to get these programs started.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with everything Drew just mentioned. I think we similarly have had several programs focusing specifically on developing relationships with the local dealerships, educating them. They are very familiar with the vehicles themselves, and it's been a nice evolution over the last couple of years, just seeing the OEMs step into the space. If you watch the Super Bowl over the last 2 years, you've probably noticed the amount of car commercials are primarily EV commercials, which is really exciting to see. So we've kind of taken a step back from just mass awareness education of EVs are fun to drive and total cost of maintenance is, a lot lower than a traditional ICE vehicle. And so focusing more on what the utility space is, but also maintaining that purchasing a vehicle is still a very emotional decision, right? You pick out a car that you want to be excited about it, and so we're trying to fill in the gaps, and I think that's been a model that SDG&E has tried to follow, is what are the gaps out there? Drew mentioned ride and drives. We've seen it be a crucial component in the decision-making process. Every fall is National Drive Electric Week. During that week, we have hosted EV Day every single year. We proudly wear the title of largest EV ride and drive event in the world, hosting the most. This year, I think what we've noticed this past year in 2022, we've noticed a huge shift coming back post-pandemic, where a lot has changed with the supply chain issues, the inventory that are available in the dealerships, and so the gap that we've identified is that the typical customer doesn't always have the benefit of walking into a dealership and test driving a car that they saw a commercial for. They're excited about it, but making a decision that is so significant financially, emotionally, without having the opportunity to even get in it and seeing the look and feel of it, seeing how it drives, is a big barrier, is a big gap. And so we try to fill that gap. We try to, work with our local dealerships, bring all the makes and models into one space and provide the opportunity. And we did in one day over 1,000 test drives, and we still had a waiting list of 1,000 people wanting to get into a car. So what does that tell us? It's working those relationships with the local dealerships and finding the opportunities where we can provide those to our customers. I will say just one more thing on the education and outreach perspective. I think we, light duty segment, we're getting into the mass majority. We're developing self-service tools to provide to our customers so they know, what rates are available to them to bring down the cost, how to get charging installed in the garage, and if that's not an availability, what public charging options are available near them. We now have, through this segment, identified new customer base, right? Our local fleet customers, the commercial segment, completely different type of outreach and education that's available. They're not making decisions based on emotions. They're making decisions based on operations, financials, and so the level of education that's going to be needed to convert the commercial sector to electrify is completely different. So that's our kind of next challenge that we're crossing now. So,
Largest ride and drive in San Diego. Challenge accepted.
All right. We'll see this fall.
That's what I was going to say, Drew. I saw your reaction to that, and I think there's going to be some friendly competition.
Exactly. Friendly competition never hurt anyone.
I'll bring the popcorn.
All right, so switching gears a little bit, a couple of you have mentioned regulators and policy. So what is the role that of federal or state regulation in electric vehicle adoption?
Yeah, so we're seeing a huge influx of money, whether it's from the Inflation Reduction Act or the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's a lot of money aimed at transportation electrification. And what that means is there's going to be a lot of infrastructure that's going to be needed to be put in place. The charging stations alone, I think under the NEVI program, they're trying to envision 500,000 charging stations by 2030. Conservative estimates say that's 100 to 150 charging stations, DC charging stations, fast charging stations per day, every single day to get to that goal. So that's pretty aggressive. So what we have to think about as an industry is like, how are we going to do it? And how are we going to equip the OEMs, the charging infrastructure companies, and the utilities to get that done? I know that Natasha mentioned how SDG&E is doing the e-bus program, the electric school buses. When we think about the challenges that are before the school districts trying to think about how they're going to get that infrastructure in place, we have to think about the underfunding of the schools. We have to think about the understaffing of the schools. How are they going to adopt all of this new infrastructure and electric school buses? Also, from the utility standpoint, a lot of the investor-owned utilities are starting to build out large transportation electrification teams, really connecting those teams within the company with strategy, policy, and regulation, which is essential to really drive what needs to be done to take the funding that's coming from the federal level and the state level to ensure that all of it's put to good use in the most efficient manner and also serving different communities equitably. So the investor owns are starting to do that. Some of the smaller utilities might struggle with that because with the municipals and the cooperatives, they have the smaller staff, they have a smaller team, they might not have the resources in place, so they're gonna have to start building up those systems as well. And again, from a regulatory standpoint, regulatory lag is a great thing for a lot of stakeholders in the process, but are there innovative ways to think about how we can accelerate some of that investment in the community to really ensure that we get to our transportation electrification goals? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of work that needs to be done to really address the funding issue and how we're going to allocate it appropriately.
Great. And how do you all see some of these new laws affecting your utilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Sheri mentioned, we're seeing all the press announcements, right? Billions of dollars coming down the pipeline for this infrastructure. So it's almost a grab bag, to be honest. And I think the way that we're approaching it is, for example, you mentioned NEVI. We know as the utility, we're not going to be the direct applicant. We don't need to be the recipient of the funds. I think what has benefited us greatly over the last couple of years is, I mentioned collaboration earlier. We established a regional collaboration in our service territory called the Accelerate to Zero Emissions. We meet on a weekly basis with representatives from the city, the local county, our governing body, the Air Pollution Control District, and I think having that collaboration and being on the same page and addressing it in numbers and really having the transparency between the organizations really has a big impact. It's a more productive application. So if we're deciding on where these charging hubs are going to be located in our service territory, it makes sense to decide on it together with the city right there present and advising us on where geographically to locate these sessions so we can plan accordingly if there's upgrades that are going to be needed in that area, we know ahead of time. And together, I think if we apply for those types of funds, we'll have better luck. So I think it's just an example of, how are these regulations that are coming down the pipeline? We know they're coming, it's just planning accordingly of how, what's the best way to bring funds into our region.
Yeah, so this is a two-part, right? So at the federal level, Uncle Ira is great, right? And the way it's great is because it's going to transform the way, especially public utilities operate. There's so many good things in there. And one of those beautiful things in there is that we can now get the equivalent of tax rebates on funding, which we couldn't take advantage of before. So, your local utility, whether it's public utility, Austin Energy, San Antonio's CPS Energy, which I'm a member of, we were just missing out on these. And so that's the first piece. And so federal funding, good. State regulation, bad, right? So where we are with the state wants to kind of regulate the way that funding comes in and put different rules around things like DC fast charging and level 2 charging and how, road taxes are managed. And at this point, we're at this weird kind of, location in the adoption cycle where it's really still dangerous, right? And so let me take a step back. Look, it's over, right? EVs have won, period. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to add any friction points, right? And what I mean by that is this. The automakers have said we are shifting our strategic plans to EVs. And so in 5 to 7 years from now, there won't be any, consumer, level internal combustion engine vehicles available to buy. So everyone's going to have to get an EV. If you don't like it, that's a tough situation. Get a horse, right? So, but when you take a look at it at the micro level, like what is going to happen to LMI, low to moderate income customers, right, who can't afford an EV at this point, but will in the future. And so that's all regulation, right? And so, look, voting has consequences and politics has consequences. And so at the state level, I think it's more negative than good, and at the federal level, it's more good than negative. But overall, I think net is going to balance out, and it's really going to be on the utilities to drive this change. And look, I don't want to be responsible for you guys buying EVs, but I will if I have to, and if I have to come to every single one of your houses, I will. Everyone needs to get an EV. Did I say that already? I need to say that over again. It's just a better experience. And so that's kind of where it comes down, where, as a local community participant and member, we have to really drive the change, because I think the regulation, both at the federal and the local and state level, will all kind of balance out.
And you've all kind of mentioned that equity piece and the low to moderate income population. What are some of the challenges of actually getting electric vehicles into their communities and helping them afford them, or even understanding the benefits? I think one of the issues we have in Austin is the west side of Austin, which is more affluent, has way more charging stations than the east side of Austin does. So I know that's something that Austin Energy has been working on the past couple of years. But what are the challenges, and how are you guys approaching them?
I'll go first. So 3 parts, right? Information, infrastructure, cost, in that order. The first barrier is EV doesn't fit in my life. I don't have enough information about it. I can't get one. That's correctable. Infrastructure, that's tough. If you live in a multi-unit dwelling in San Antonio, it's probably about 30 years old. No way you're going to retrofit that thing for even level 2 charging, right? And so you have to have different solutions, and the truth of the matter is we might just be a few years out from you being able to actively utilize an EV, right? And then, it comes kind of the cost part, and that's being solved. If we look now, so I'm going to take a macro view. Just over the weekend, OPEC cut 1 million barrels of oil. Or was it 100 million? It's a lot. I can't remember which one it was. It was a lot, right? And the impact has been immediate. Costs have gone up. If you look at electricity costs, the beauty of it is that we got to go to the regulators to even do a slight increase. So if you buy a vehicle, you basically know for the next 2 years exactly what you're going to be paying for. And so from a informational perspective for an EV owner, it's a much more stable environment. And stable is a risk reduction term, right? Stable is good. And so that's the first part. The second part is if you look at lithium prices, they've dropped about 30% just in the past month, which is nuts. And so there is a pathway where all automakers see parity within the next 2 years on EV to internal combustion engine cost. So take this away. Everyone will be able to afford an EV because they will be cheaper than internal combustion engines by 2027. So the equivalent vehicle, right, size, capability, range, and an EV compared to an internal combustion engine by 2027 will be cheaper. And so it's just a matter of time before that kind of equals out. And so if you take the information and the infrastructure and really focus on those, the cost will figure itself out in a few years. Hopefully sooner, but definitely by 2027.
Yeah, I think Drew nailed it. All three categories, we feel the same way. I think from an infrastructure perspective is getting creative with those programs. 50% of San Diego residents live in a multi-unit dwelling. A lot of them are renters, so having the option of, even if you are financially capable to go out there and get a charger installed in your garage, sometimes you don't even have a garage, you have a parking slot. So where do you charge this thing, right? So a lot of the education that we've been providing is about myth busting. I promise you, if you don't drive an EV, you won't get electrocuted if you plug in to charge when it's raining. That I promise you on behalf of all the OEMs. But getting back to the infrastructure component, we have set very aggressive goals. 50% of all of our installations in our infrastructure programs are going to be in disadvantaged communities, right? So then you face the other side of the coin. When we go into these communities and we're doing these ride and drive events and we're trying to educate people about the cars and total cost of ownership, and in the long run it does end up being cheaper than a traditional ICE vehicle, we have to listen to our customers. We're faced with feedback that, I could barely afford to put food on the table. I'm not going to go out and buy a new car. Okay, so then what are the other options that are available? Maybe they can't wait till 2027. There's a used car market. In the next few months, we're rolling out a new incentive specifically for our low-income customers that are for used EV vehicles, and is a financial incentive for that. So we have to constantly be checking in because this environment is evolving so quickly of what is the latest kind of barrier, what is the gap. I think, I mentioned charging infrastructure, and for those that that do live in MUDs and aren't able to charge at home, educating them on the public infrastructure. We have our flagship pilot program that we rolled out 5 years ago, Power You Drive. We installed 3,000 chargers at multi-unit dwellings and at workplaces. So the two biggest areas where cars are parked, which is when you're sleeping at home, or when you're working, you're at the office 8 hours a day, your car is just parked there, why not fill up your battery, right? So just trying to fill in those gaps. So I think that model has been really successful, specifically impacting the MUD customers, right? So they don't have to rely on installing a charger in their garage if they don't have one. They're able to leverage a bank of chargers that we put in place. We worked with the HOA. We kind of did all the dirty legwork that, sometimes the residents of the community just don't have the time to go out and do. And so just filling those gaps, that program was so successful that we recently just got approval, and we're rolling out an extension program. So 2,000 more chargers going into MUDs, and 50% of those are going to be in equitable communities. So that's just the beginning and just an example, but I think we just have to take a holistic look at the picture.
Yeah, and I'll just add, from an education standpoint, one of the services that we provide our members is multi-member studies. And one of them that we recently completed was benchmarking equity in transportation electrification. So we had 8 of our members come together, and these are investor-owned utilities, municipal utilities, and cooperatives, and asked us to go out into the field to actually talk to their staff and also to talk to community-based organizations to figure out what are the barriers, what are the challenges to addressing equity. And all of our information is available to the public for free on our website, cfapower.org. What we found is with equity, it starts at the top. You have to be really intentional. It starts from the CEO and goes down to the staff level when it comes to the utility. What we found from the communities is there is a level of mistrust for utilities from time to time. Utilities can be intimidating. It's really important for utilities to go out and work with community-based organizations to develop those new partnerships, whether it's with a transit service, whether it's with a local library, whether it's with a school district. It's also really good to start young, educating students, K through 12, about the benefits of transportation electrification, because they'll take that home to their families and they'll talk about it around the dinner table. I know that when my kids come home from school, they're always talking about fossil fuels and climate change and wanting to know what mom does, and I'm like, we're saving the planet, honey, we're saving the planet. So I think it starts young, and really, making sure, once again, that you meet those communities where they are, going to them, listening to them. I think, Drew, you mentioned having the success stories, talking about the friends and neighbors that are actually, investing in electric vehicles and utilizing it. Because again, a lot of the environmental justice communities and disadvantaged communities see EVs as a luxury item for now. But as Natasha mentioned, those prices are going to come down, and EVs are here. and get a horse, like you said. So we're going to have to find ways to be creative and also just break down the barriers. We have to go into those communities speaking in their native language. When I was at the Consumer Advocate's Office, quite often I would go hand in hand with the Utility Commission and talk to different organizations at their community-based facilities, and we would have it in multiple languages. It's not just English and Spanish. You really have to, again, knock down the barriers and address all the local needs in their local languages. There's also technology issues. Some people don't have access to cell phones or smartphones. So how are you going to get them that information? And just information, that education at their level where they can understand it. It goes so far to have those open conversations and listening sessions and working with the community-based organizations to really address their local and unique needs.
Listening to them and not just telling them what they need. All right, so EVs have won by, it's over. Is the grid going to be ready? And what is maybe the most important thing? What should utilities be doing to prepare?
This is going to be a great conversation. I need somebody to add some more time to the clock. So here's the thing. I'm going to give you guys some inside gouge. For local communities, especially public power, electric vehicles have an outsized value, and I'll explain it to you, right? So how many people in here, do some audience interaction here, have EVs? That's a pretty good number. And everyone else, I'm assuming, has internal combustion engine vehicles. You're ruining, there you go, horse. Besides that guy, you guys are ruining your community. I'm going to tell you why, right? You're costing your community money, because for every $1 of gasoline you put in your vehicle, only about 4 to 7 cents stays in the local community. The rest leaves. It goes back to the refining process, for the trucking. It literally departs your community. And that 4 to 7 cents stays in. But for every $1 of energy you put into your electric vehicle, 76 cents stays in the local community, right? And this is such a beautiful thing, because it tells the story of the value chain of not only utilities and electric vehicles, but how consumers have gone from ratepayers to customers to now partners in the utility space. And this is huge, right? And so when someone asks me the question, can the grid take it? Not only can the grid take it, it's good for the grid. EVs are good, nice schedulable loads that charge at night off peak, that you can incentivize people to charge when you want them to and where you want them to, and in the future maybe even provide energy back. Listen, this is a game changer. One of many game changers that are coming that are going to be enabled through technology. And the question you really have to ask yourself is, why are you not a good person by not owning an EV? So with that, there you go.
How do I follow? I think you're all good people. It is the question that we've been getting. I think we're at the time that the utilities, that is the front and center question. Is the grid going to be ready? I will say that in San Diego, we have 80,000 EVs on the road already. We have some pretty strict mandates coming down the pipeline in California. We have some executive orders that by 2030, we're going to have 8 million EVs on the road in California. That's 3 years away, or 7 years. Can't do my math. 7 years away. And our share in our region is about 10% of that. So 800,000 EVs to be on the road in the next few years. What I will say is, I mentioned it earlier, getting engaged early on in the process. I think we have a plan for light-duty vehicles, how to, with innovative rate structure, incentivizing our customers financially to charge at certain times of the day. It's easy. The technology is there. You don't have to stay up till midnight just to plug in your car. You can set it up within your car, within the charger. There's ways to go around it. It's really not that hard. I will say that, the challenge that's in the forefront is the commercial sector, right? The Class 8 trucks, the transit buses that are going to be electrifying in the next few years. In California, it's even more aggressive than anywhere else in the country, with regulations that are forcing these customers to electrify sooner than later. So how do we prepare for that? How do we prepare for 20 huge buses plugging in at the same time? Will our grid be able to handle it? And the answer is yes. On average, we're quoting our customers that it takes about 16 months from a beginning of when the decision's made, we're going to go electric, to contacting the utility, to having the infrastructure energized at their site where the buses are actually, or the vehicle is actually able to plug in and charge. During that time, as long as we get into the pipeline, as long as we can plan accordingly, we can upgrade the necessary infrastructure, we can plan ahead for it. But it does require constant customer engagement, collaboration in order to get ahead of it, planning. What we are all nervous about, I think, is the bottleneck effect, where the utility is getting this mass amount of applications because now all of a sudden all the customers want to electrify all at once, and how do we prioritize and how do we handle it? And I think what we're trying to do, at least in San Diego, is to take the proactive approach. We're not waiting for the customers to reach out to us. We're going to the customers, we're sitting down with them, we're helping them develop a plan. So whether that is next year or they say, well, we're going to electrify in the next 5 years, that's helpful for us to know because we can keep in touch with them, understand and be part of the planning process. So really setting ourselves up as a trusted energy advisor beyond just being there to provide the pipes and wires and turn on the light switch, right? We're helping them with a multitude of aspects that are beyond just our direct line of responsibility, right? We're connecting our customers with incentives not only for the infrastructure that they need through our programs, but for the vehicles themselves. In certain cases, for small and medium businesses and some customers in our disadvantaged communities, we're actually sitting down and writing their grant application for the vehicles themselves, because we know that without that extra funding, they're not going to be able to make the move faster. So just having that through the support system, you're kind of inserting yourself and being able to have a little bit of control in the planning process, which will help us make sure that the grid is going to be ready long term.
Yeah, and I would just add that just listening to our many utility members, listening to these wonderful experts talk about how their utilities are getting ready, I'm really optimistic about the next 10 years. There's a lot to do. As we've mentioned, there's a lot of funding coming from the federal level. There's some state funding. There are some innovative regulators out there who are looking at opportunities to really incentivize and ensure that transportation electrification happens and happens quickly. Talking through like the education components, getting customers excited about the possibility of bringing an EV into their home or into their multifamily dwelling or into their business, even electrifying fleets. There's so much that's going to happen over the next 10 years. And I think when we come back here in 10 years and talk about it, we're really going to be excited about all the successes that we've had, all the opportunities that we took advantage of working together to create this electric highway across our nation that's really going to supercharge our nation going forward.
Great, thank you guys. We've got a few minutes left for audience questions. So does anybody have a question out there? There's
This
one.
is your chance to get back at Drew.
Oh, there's a mic coming for you.
It's kind of bright back there. Hello, my name is Joshua Triana, and I'm the founder of Evolution Solutions. And we're partnered up with Hevo and Traxo. We have an ecosystem of partners. So my question for y'all is, how do y'all envision the standardization process in regards to mission critical infrastructure? You know, as far EV charging deployment, enterprise systems, the AMI, all the above. Will it be through stakeholder engagement, such as via CPS, SAWs, ISPs, or will it be through public-private partnerships?
I'll go first on this one. So I'm a board member of an organization called EDTA, right? And we do a lot of work with like IEEE for standards. And so this is actually coming top down. Basically, the manufacturers are determining what the standards are for now. I do think that'll change, right? Consumer choice is critical whenever standards are being made. And as we've seen with the charging ports, right? Everyone who has an EV knows that there's basically 3 charging ports. There's CHAdeMO, there's a common charging standard, CCS, and then there's the North American standard, which is also known as a Tesla charger, right? And so out of those three, the Tesla charger, believe it or not, is winning. And it's not because the standards bearers didn't say, like, you know, we want this other one to win. That's what they did. They said they want CCS to win, but it's not. So, you know, ultimately it's going to come down to the consumer. The unfortunate part for you, Joshua, is that it's not going to be clear until it is, right? There won't be a winner until everyone else is dead. Kind of like what CHAdeMO is now, right? It's just, you're going to have victors and you're going to have losers, and capitalism, that's the answer. So I hope that helps.
So there's one more standardization, right, with the charging now. It's SAE,
Right.
J2954.
Right. And that's coming, right? And so there's 3 more standards, actually, wireless standards that are coming. So hold on to your socks, folks. It's going to be a wild ride. Ultimately, though, the consumer is going to choose, and so when you get your EV, you decide.
Got about 1 minute left if anyone else has a question.
I have a question. So with, as some utilities with large penetrations of electric vehicles, what would you suggest that the other utilities do to prepare for them? The 2 factors that we have talked about is like clustering effect, where you have EVs concentrating in certain neighborhoods and then creating local grid issues. But on the second side, how do you get these EV owners to enroll in programs so you can use those as resources? What are your thoughts on these 2 aspects?
I'll take that one, as California is probably exactly what you're describing. So I think you're right? We have one of our zip codes, 92130. It's a neighborhood in San Diego, fairly affluent. It was I know you're going to like some friendly competition, the highest sold per capita EVs in the United States last year, right, within San Diego. And so in a way, it's constantly keeping our tabs on the data, right? So working with the regional stakeholders, understanding purchasing data, working with organizations like SEPA, understanding what those trends and patterns are is going to be critical. So again, from a planning perspective, we know that certain EVs are spiking in certain neighborhoods. We can plan for that. It doesn't happen overnight, right? It's not like 1 million customers will go out and buy a Tesla tomorrow unless Elon throws out a crazy incentive out there and starts giving them away for free. Maybe then it'll spike, but even then it'll be fairly distributed. So we could plan ahead for that. I think the level of education that's just out there and just continuing to engage with all of our customers in different ways. There's different segments of customers. Some people buy EVs because they're, into the technology. Some people are really into the environment. I think we're, at least in California, past the early adopters that purchase for those reasons. So now we're preparing for the mass majority, and that is the equal distribution of charging infrastructure in our service territory. But I think we have a whole team dedicated to data and processing it and analyzing the trends and understanding it and passing it on to our, sister department, the planning grid tech department, that can then take it and understand, okay, what substations do we have in this area? Do we need to plan for upgrades in the next few years? I think that's going to be one of the key areas that I would recommend.
All right, we are out of time, but good news, we're taking a 15-minute break after this session, so you all can continue the conversations with our panelists. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. Thank you all so much. And y'all can take a 15-minute break. We'll be back here at 11 o'clock for the next session.